Okay, tournament recap, guys. Tournament recap. This is round number 1, and I had the black pieces. I was playing a 10-year-old, which is always scary, and he's pretty strong. He's gained like 300 and something points in the last in the last two or 3 months. So very very dangerous player. He's basically just been tearing it up in Europe, and I don't like playing the 10-year-olds. I don't like playing an opponent where their like head is barely above the table. It's always very intimidating. When they can't see the board and they're still outplaying you, that's very disturbing. Very disturbing for me. But anyway, they started with e4. I played c5, my favorite opening, Sicilian. Well, one of my favorite openings. I really like King's Indian as well. And they go for c3. This is the Alapin Sicilian. I go knight f6, attacking their pawn in the center just like this. And he decides to push it forward. Kicks my knight to the center of the board. And then he strikes out with d5. So this is, yeah, by far the main way to play it. You can also go knight f3. Or maybe bishop c4. These are like the other options. But d5 is by far the main move. And I'm capturing that. So after I take on d4, main move is just to capture with the pawn. There's some very interesting lines if they take with the queen. There's like e6, knight c6, here f5, and a bunch of weird stuff. Or like queen e4 and f5. Some pretty weird lines that can happen there, but he just goes for knight f3. Sorry, he doesn't capture on d4. He plays this Smith-Morris style, but not really, because I can't actually take the pawn on c3. So it's not really a Smith-Morris. But I just developed my knight, protecting the pawn now. And if you want to take with the knight, then that will drop this pawn. So he has to basically capture back with the pawn, or just leave it there and play bishop c4. These are the two options that white has. He decides to take the pawn, and I play d6. So d6, I'm now undermining this pawn in the center. And my objective is that I want to capture this pawn. And when I capture this pawn in the future, he'll have this isolated, well, not isolated, but this kind of weak e-pawn in the center potentially, which can come under some threat. I'm also preventing indirectly moves like knight c3, because on knight c3, which would be a very inaccurate move, I can just go takes, queen takes, and something like bishop d7, bishop c6, with just a better position for black. So he didn't go for this. He instead went bishop c4, which is still probably the main move. And I go for pawn takes here. Knight b6 is one of the other lines, but I really like the positions that I get after pawn takes on e5. They're very pleasant. And the idea of this is that after they take here, I go for knight b4. And this is a very interesting line. I think I've made a video that includes it before. But the point is that now the queens are looking at each other. The queen is the only thing protecting the c2 square, and my knight wants to go to c2. So this knight to b4 move threatens c2. Queen b3 is one of the main ideas, but it often runs into e6 and then a knight to a5 move in the future. So he opts to try and play it safe and just trade the queens. But you know what they say. With the youth to the endgame, and the reason for that is that they just have less experience in endgame positions and maybe a little bit less positional understanding. Because I've had loads and loads of games in Blitz from these positions. And because he's only 10 years old and has been playing for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years only, he'll have had just less experience in these endgames, and I was thinking I'll have good chances to grind it out. And already black's a little bit better here. So black's ideas are to go bishop e6, exchange this bishop, get a very nice knight on e6, which controls a lot of key squares like this. Very nice knight. And it can also support this g5, g4 pawn push to remove this knight over here. This knight will come back and eventually pressure this pawn in the middle. So, of course, white plays knight a3, because white doesn't want to lose a rook and get forked, which would not be good. And I go for bishop e6. So, bishop e6 offers the bishop exchange. Bishop exchange is very, very good for me. My knight comes out, this knight comes back. c7 is also protected, so there's no knight b4, knight b5, and knight to c7. Once again, by the way, any questions about the game is very much encouraged. So they decided to castle. I went g6, and around here is where I sort of ran out of theoretical knowledge. I thought g6 made a lot of sense. I might have had some blitz games in it that I vaguely remember, but I didn't know like the database statistics and stuff like that, which I knew up until before castles. So yeah, my bishop's coming out to pressure this pawn, knight's coming back to pressure this pawn, and it turns out this is still in the theory books, and black does very, very well. So they played bishop d2, attacking my knight. The knight has to go back. I have no other real option. I mean, if I play this, then just taking on e6 makes my position terrible. I have double pawns, and I don't really want to do that for no reason. So I just drop the knight back like this. They bring the rook in. Do I prefer forcing the queen off early against the younglings? Absolutely. I mean, I don't necessarily want to force it, but I'm always happy to play an endgame against a younger player. Absolutely. There's just like certain concepts, and when there's not a clear plan, the younger players definitely don't do as well as when there's a lot of tactics and a lot of craziness. So rook c1, I continue with bishop g7, pressuring this pawn in the center now. The knight and the bishop attack it, so he's got to do something. He plays knight b5, making a counter threat over here, which is very, very reasonable. And I technically could play this move with an idea that it's counter-attacking like this, and saying if you take me, I take back, and then I go c7. But it's very, very dicey, and I don't think it works at all. Like here, takes here, right? And now this is a check on my king. I can't even take the knight. I'd have to take here, takes the rook. And this just doesn't work at all. So this was my first calculation. I was like, can I take the pawn? Absolutely not. This looks terrible. This looks very bad. So he's making a serious threat. The next line that I calculated was the other forcing moves, like bishop takes on c4. And bishop takes c4's got some intrigue here. If knight c7 check, which is obviously bad, then here, then here, then here, I take the rook, and let's say you take it back, and then I play this, then I'm going to pick your knight up, and this position is just completely winning for black. So that's the obvious idea. However, I saw that you can just go rook takes on c4, and then things started to get a little choppy here. Because if I castle, then I go knight c7, rook c8, knight d5, and I didn't like this position very much, because I saw this other tactic, which is if I go knight e6 to try and consolidate with rook d8 and some skewer idea, then he has rook takes on c6, which is very, very strong, and I'm just much worse here. Rook takes on c6, knight takes on e7, takes, knight takes on c6, takes it, and then something like rook c1, and I'm just getting destroyed. Like, this is terrible position, down a pawn, and isolated weak pawns, and I can't go for this, clearly. So then the other move I considered was maybe I go e6, but then knight f6 takes. So this looks awful. I can't get my knight developed. This pawn went from being a weakness to suffocating me, and this doesn't look good at all. So I eventually realized that in this line I'd probably have to settle for rook e8, and this is where I mostly concluded the bishop c4 line, and I didn't like it at all. I thought rook e8 looks quite passive, and I don't know why I've allowed his knight to get into the center, so I was not a fan of this at all. Engine says it's equal and actually thinks it's alright, but I wasn't a fan. There's some other lines as well that get very, very choppy, like knight to e6 and knight g5, which was also quite complicated, and I was concerned about this one as well. Because the point is that if I take it, then takes, then check, then here, then takes, and then you take my knight, because it's hanging over here. And if I instead, I think you can also go... Oh wait, did I mess it up there? You can also go bishop here. I think bishop takes on g5. Maybe bishop takes on e5. Yeah, bishop takes on e5. Protects the c7 square, but he goes f4. and then a6, pawn takes here, takes it here, and rook c5. And I saw this position as well, and it looked very, very dicey. But the engine says that black's a bit better. I really didn't know how to evaluate it. And for all of these reasons, I rejected the forcing moves like castles and bishop c4, and instead just played rook c8, just keeping the position together and protecting the c7 square against knight c7, and then I will castle. Very just like standard move, avoiding complexity here. Which, I mean, I did take a look at the tactics, so if something like bishop takes on c4 was good for me, then I would have gone for it, but it seemed quite unclear, especially after the knight here and knight g5 lines looked very complicated. So he ended up taking on e6. I played knight takes on e6, and I think bishop takes on e6 was a small mistake, because bishop takes on e6 now means that I get this monster knight here. Very, very nice knight. And it's unopposed. Also, once I kick out this knight, then I'm just going to be taking on e5, and I've forever got lots of pressure here. And the really nasty thing about this position for white is that with this pressure here, they can never play f4, because the knight would have to move out of the way to play f4, but in the time that the knight moves out of the way to play f4, the pawn will drop. So the defending piece that they need to protect the pawn is tied down forever, because they can never use their other pawn to reinforce it, which means that this is effectively an isolated pawn. And I know it's not technically an isolated pawn, but as far as I'm concerned, this e5 pawn is as isolated as it gets. He helped me get my knight out, should have kept the tension and let me take on c4. I absolutely agree. He should not have done this. The problem is, he didn't like that I was threatening a6. Like, if he does nothing, I go a6, he plays knight c3, this bishop's loose, I take it. He didn't like this tension between the pieces. That's what I think. But maybe he should have gone for something like bishop e3, a6... He can't even play knight a7 here, can he? Because then after this capture, then my rook's like this. So this was one of his other ideas, and he doesn't... This rook would just release itself on the bishop as well. So it's quite difficult to say where exactly he went wrong, actually. And I think even just way back here, this position is just a bit better for black. It's just preferable. Is knight takes on e5 a threat? Not quite, because then my a7 pawn would hang. But if I can play a6, move the way, and then take on e5, then this is definitely a threat, yes. So he ended up playing captures, and bishop e3 to try and force the issue. And I gave this an inaccuracy. I labeled this game myself. I've not turned on the engine with it yet. But anyway, let's move on. Maybe it's not good. I don't know. I'd rather keep the position very, very stable, because what I know about this position is that we have the e5 pawn to pressure, which is effectively an isolated pawn. So my objective is just to try and trade off, if I can trade off the rooks, and if I can trade off this knight for this knight, then I'm just going to have a winning endgame of these minor pieces. So after bishop e3, which I gave an inaccuracy, which maybe was a little unfair, because it makes some sense. He's going after the a7 pawn. I play a6, he plays knight a7, I play knight a7, protecting the rook like this, so you can't capture my rook. He takes the knight, and I castle now. So finally, the position's stabilized. I have these minor pieces, like this and this. They're the same minor pieces, but mine are much, much better. You can see, my pawns are on light squares, so his bishop has no targets. He's got this pawn on e5, so my bishop on g7 is forever pressuring it. And this knight on e6 is an absolute beast. It protects these squares like this, so the bishop has very limited scope. And it also supports a g5 pawn push in the future, where g4 is a threat to remove the knight and then just potentially even just win the pawn in the center like this. So he had to kind of go bishop to e3 to stop this g5, g4 plan. And I briefly considered h6, but I thought after h4, I've just created the weakness on h6, and I wasn't a big fan of this, because now my bishop has to work protecting this, and maybe he can even have some time to move his knight out of the way and trade off this e-pawn for my h-pawn. And so I didn't like this at all. I thought h6 would have been inaccurate. Instead, I played this really, really cool move, which looks extremely superficial and very pointless, actually, at first. I played this move rook f to d8. And it doesn't seem like it does anything, right? Like, what is it doing? I have no infiltration anywhere. Like, maybe I can go here and pressure a pawn in the future, but it doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot. Especially after the rook might move over here to d1, and I've just got the two rooks staring at each other. Like, what is black really doing? Can anyone guess what the plan behind rook to d8 was? Anyone want to take a guess? Because this is where the game gets pretty cool. King f8, king e8, and you'll see it gets even better from there. So yeah, you're right. King f8, king e8 is the idea. Activate the king. Activate the king in the endgame. He ends up playing g3 because he doesn't have a real plan. He's struggling. He's struggling for moves, and I could tell he was getting uncomfortable. You can see he took quite a while on this g6 move. 8 moves to play g6. That's the sign of someone who doesn't have a plan. So, after g6, I go king f8. You're absolutely correct, roly-poly. I go king f8. And now the king is walking into the center of the board. And my plan is I want to exchange off all the rooks and then just walk my king up into the center and eat his pawn. It's absolutely brutal. You just play g3, h4, and maybe something happens? Exactly. White doesn't have a plan. That's why it's so rough. White can't be moving their pawns. That just makes them weaker. Why would white trade the rooks? And so he does the only semi-active thing he can and plays the move bishop to b6. And watch this. This is absolutely beautiful, by the way, guys. This is the top engine line of the computer, right? Trade the rooks and then rook a8. Stuff the rook in the corner. Just hear me out, hear me out. Rook a8 is quite a deep move. And I'm very happy about it. The point of rook to a8 is I want to keep the rook in the corner. Eventually the rook will come back here. And in the distant future, I saw that there's a potential that his rook will try and come over to b4. And then I can play some stuff with, like, when the king gets to c6, I can play a5, a4, and b5. And then lock the rook out in the game. And you'll see this was actually a potential line in the future. So I was quite happy with this. What I want you to notice about this position is that traditional chess wisdom would tell you that the rook on the open file, white has an active rook, white's got an active bishop, so surely white's better, right? They've got open file, my rook's just gone to the corner, looks ridiculous. But the important thing is, if the rook has no infiltration square, it is a worthless rook. I don't care if your rook is on the most open file on the board, if it can't invade. And it can't invade, because this beautiful, beautiful e6 knight protects c7, protects c5, pawn guards c6, rook guards c8, and you have no way in. So it's pretty brutal. How about knight to d4 to chuck the pawn? Well, I think no, knight d4, yeah, I like this endgame a lot. Takes, the bishop's already protecting c7. That's the point. That's the point, exactly. So you have no infiltration. And then I will simply go bishop to d6, improve my king, and this should be a win for black, I would assume. That was my thought process. There's no rook c7, exactly. It all just works. It just works. The pieces just come together beautifully. Doesn't rook e1 win the pawn back? No, because I take on b2. Exactly. just the tactics. It just works out. And so yeah, we end up with a position like this, b5. Black is pressing and has a clear advantage. If I can trade the rooks as well, then it'll be an easy win. 2 passed pawns. Well, not 2 passed pawns, but an outside pawn that will eventually become passed. So yeah. Which is why it's really nasty for white. White has no way to clearly untangle, right? Everything else is too sad, you might just go for this? Yeah, it's very hard to just chuck a pawn, though. I think the engine might say... I think the engine just wants you to do nothing, actually. Which is really brutal. And the crazy thing about this game is that the engine doesn't even really notice where white goes wrong. It seems like it just randomly changes its mind and says that the position's losing, which is really weird. Okay, there's a couple concrete moments where white, I think, can go for a pawn down endgame and try to grovel that. But that's really all there is to do. So white plays king g2. He's still kind of just waiting it out. He doesn't really have a plan. And of course, you already know my king goes to e8. And I just want to go king d7, trade the rook, activate my rook as well, and my rook has fantastic infiltration spots on this c2 square because their knight is very passive and it's not really helping out in the defense of all the white pawns. So he plays rook c4, trying to activate his rook. I play king d7. And now my king has literally just walked from g8 to f8 to e8 to d7, and let me tell you, he's not about to stop there. They go rook h4, attacking my pawn over here on h7. I just play h5. I thought a little bit about king c6, but decided that the position doesn't really change a whole lot if I play h5 anyway. It's not like he's going to break through. So I was quite happy with this pawn here anyway. Could he go rook e1 to protect the pawn and prepare knight to d4? Rook e1 to protect the pawn. He could, but then I'm probably going to go for rook c8, knight d4, take, and I guess rook c2, which looks like a very active position for black. Like, the king is going to go up to e6, I guess. And yeah, maybe white should have gone for this. But white will clearly be a bit worse with all these dark square targets. So yeah, maybe rook e1's an idea, though. I think it makes sense, for sure. Okay, so after pawn h5, he goes rook e4. So he kind of goes for your idea as well. Roly-poly. He tries to protect the pawn in the center. But now my king goes to c6, and the march continues. So I've just played king f8, king e8, king d7, king c6. And let me tell you, it's not about to stop there. The bishop moves back, and can anyone guess the next move that I played, right? King d7, double exclam. No, not king d7. King d5. There we go. Put it in there. I win king of the hill. King d5. We made it. Right? The king is now the most advanced piece. If a king cannot lead by example, then why should his subjects follow? Exactly. You win king of the hill in a classical game. That's how I knew I was asserting dominance. Right? It was yeah, it was definitely nice to play this move, king d5, attacking this rook, and once again, this absolute god of a knight on e6 is protecting the d5 square. So there's no rook, the d4 square, sorry. There's no rook d4. It's protecting all of these squares around the king, so that somehow it's safe for my king to be venturing into the position. He goes rook to b4, and I play pawn to b5, and now the rook is in prison. So it's difficult to say where exactly white went wrong, but the position is starting to collapse now. If he went a5, I have rook b8, takes, king c6 is coming to protect the pawn, and then my rook will just activate down one of these two files, and it gets very, very hard to play. So instead of that, we get the first engine-approved mistake of the game, or at least I also marked it as a mistake. And the reason is, and the move he played is bishop to f4. He wanted to protect his pawn in the center so that he can move his knight around. I'm not exactly sure. He was just adding extra support, I guess. Also, yeah, the pawn was under attack, so he wanted to protect it. But can anyone find the winning plan, given what I've talked about earlier, where you want to exchange the rooks? Can anyone find the winning plan here for black? Rook c8, exactly. Exactly, rook c8. Rook c8, rook c4. Now black is just completely winning, because the white rook is trapped. So rook goes to c8, we see a4, and rook c4. So the pawn is x-ray attacked. White doesn't really have a choice but to play bishop d2, unless they want to lose quicker and allow my king in and just pummel everything like this. Actually, no, I was going to take with the pawn. Because then there's knight c5, knight a4. And this would be crushing for black. So he didn't take. He instead played bishop d2. I took the rook. The rook is now gone. I win the pawn on a4. He wins my pawn on e7, but I also win the pawn on e5. And we get this endgame, right? Where it's knight versus bishop, and I only have one extra pawn. So, like, if you just look at this position, and you don't understand the, like, concrete elements of king activity, and actually how valuable this doubled a-pawn is, then you might not understand that immediately this is just completely winning for black. It's game over. Black is like plus 1,000. If I turn the engine on, you wouldn't. It would like spew off the screen. It's so many minus numbers for black. Black is just completely winning. So yeah, he has nothing to do basically. The plan for black here, after he plays h4, I improve my king a little bit further. I play king e4. The a file will be a queen exactly. And if he plays f3, then my king will just completely dominate. So we end up with a position after bishop f6, because he didn't want like a position like this. Ideally, he wanted to avoid this, because then his king is just completely dominated. My king will always be threatening to invade and stuff like that. So he plays bishop f6 to try and block my pawn from advancing and also protect his pawn on b2. But can anyone find the optimal square for this knight to get to? And bonus points if you can find the path the knight needs to take, in order for the knight to be on the best possible square, which will help it promote the pawn and win the game. So if you can put this knight on any square, where would you put it? d4 is the right square, but there's a much cleaner path. And the path that is the most clean, it comes after knight to d4. Because now the knight threatens to go to b3, from which it has a dual move of knight to d2 and knight a5, and the bishop is unable to stop both of the knight moves, which is very nice. And the problem is, if their bishop goes to c3, then the king goes to d3, right? So let me show this as an example. If the knight goes here, the bishop goes here, the king goes here, and they can't do anything about it, right? Because the threat is a3 now, so the bishop cannot remain. The bishop cannot remain on c3. It would have to move somewhere, then knight a5 comes, knight c4, and the game is over. It is completely over. It might be slightly better to have the pawn on f5, though. Maybe I would include f5 first, and then improve the king. So that's the whole point. Knight goes to d4, threatens knight b3, followed by this maneuver to the c4 square. And can anyone tell me what the point of this knight c4 is? Well, the point is, I'm just going to say it. The point is a3. And the bishop cannot protect the pawn and prevent a3 at the same time, which our knight is threatening both. So our knight is threatening to play a3 and also pressuring the b2 pawn. So the bishop cannot stay on both diagonals. It's impossible. It can't prevent both ideas. So they just play f4, I play knight b3, they play king f2, I play knight a5. This is slightly more accurate, in my opinion, than knight d2, because then they can go king e1. Doubled pawns for the win, exactly. And on king e1, knight c4, I thought they can get their king around a little bit quicker. Why is a3 a threat? Because then we trade off a doubled pawn, and we'll simply have the outside passed pawn, which will deflect, which will win their bishop, or deflect their king away from the king's side, allowing our king to capture all their pawns. What about king d3? I don't like king d3. The reason I don't like king d3 is because it lets their king try and take space over here and potentially block us out from making progress. And if they can stop f5, then maybe they can break with f5, and this can get risky. So watch this. King here, king here. Sorry, they can't go there. But let's say I try and move in with the knight or something and then break with a3, like this. Makes a lot of sense, right? But maybe they can go f5, sorry. And maybe they go king f4. And all of a sudden, it gets very dicey, right? I want to keep their king completely locked out. I want to maintain complete dominance over the position. And that means that you need to optimize your piece placement first whilst dominating your opponents, right? So you want to maintain complete control when playing these games, ideally. Because I've got all the time in the world, right? White has no constructive plans. And if your opponent has no plans, then you want to try and keep them restricted and just improve your pieces. So that's why I much prefer moving the knight than moving the king in. Moving the king could get a bit risky, especially when f5 is possible. So anyway, my knight ends up on a5. It invades to c5. It invades to c4. And now they can't go king d2 even. So it's very, very unpleasant. He just starts shuffling with bishop c3. I play f5, really locking it down because I know that I'm going to have to win all of these kingside pawns eventually, because the transformation is going to be I play a3, captures, knight goes back, and then this pawn's going to run down the board. Eventually, I'm going to win their bishop, and then I'm going to have to win all these pawns on the king side, right? So he just starts shuffling. I play a3. He takes here, knight goes back to c4, and I start pushing the pawn down the board. The pawn just moves. The pawn is rolling. I go knight d2, knight c2 is coming. If you move the king over, I'm invading and I'm taking all of your pawns over here instead, so you can't do that. So he moves the bishop somewhere. I play king c2, knight c2. He plays king d2. I queen, takes. King goes back, knight comes over, and now the game is done. I played king f3 here, which was sloppy. King h3 and knight e2, and he resigned. However, there was a much nicer win in this position. Can anyone try and find it? I'm actually going to go get some water. So I'll give you guys this position. What is black's fastest checkmate? I'm going to give you the position. I'll be right back after getting some more water. King f2 is the right move. And it's a very, very beautiful mate. King f2. King h3. And you stalemate the king with knight f3. But you don't really, because they have this pawn move, and then you capture it, and it's a checkmate. And what I missed during the game is I thought this was a very bad move, because they can go king h1 and then knight f3. And then I was like, okay, g4, I'm risking stalemate, but not really, because you actually just capture the pawn, and now they have a new pawn that can move. They push their pawn, you push your pawn, they take it, and you checkmate them with this knight like this. Yeah, exactly. I was just trying to avoid stalemates over the board. But yeah, I pretty much expected my opponent to resign a while ago. So I got a little bit lazy there with the calculations. But that's game number one. Really, really brutal. So thanks to everyone who watched this far. If you enjoyed my style of teaching and might be interested in some one-to-one coaching, then do check out the link in the description and send me an email. But other than all of that, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!